Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Conspiracies. I'm your host, Cody. We're going to share a story tonight from a good friend of mine. His name's Josh. He's from Arkansas, and he's going to share his Bigfoot encounter he had back when he was younger. It's definitely one that would be terrifying for anyone, especially at the age he was at when he saw it. We're going to let him get into it, so let's take a listen to what Josh has to say about his Bigfoot encounter.
So I grew up in a really rural community in the River Valley and spent all my time in the woods and very familiar with the area. And I mean, when I say I spent all my time in the woods, I spent all my time in the woods as a kid. But what happened to me, I never really expected to happen. And I didn't know anything about Bigfoot. I really honestly thought Bigfoot was a monster truck. I can remember having very vivid memories of, feeling like I was watched in the woods, which is pretty common for most kids, I think. But anyways, my parents took me to my grandpa's one night, and they said we're going to watch a movie about Bigfoot, and of course I thought it was the truck, and then I found out it's the Falk monster, and that really messed with me pretty good. But anyways, so I was about 14 years old when this happened, and my mom and dad started to leave me alone at home at night, and it was kind of during the wintertime. It had to be the wintertime because I remember it got dark pretty early, but kind of lay out the property and kind of where this happened at. My dad had bought 3 acres in the River Valley close to the Ozark National Forest. And still to this day, I don't know how he did this. My dad was my hero, and he was able to build this house by hand, bought the land, homesteaded it, and it was surrounded by just nature. Back behind us, there was a woods, an open field, train tracks, the Arkansas River. We had one neighbor to the right and a neighbor to the left. And I spent all my time out in those woods and really familiar with every inch of that area. There was arrowheads out there, a lot of Indian artifacts, a bunch of stuff like that. But you'd be out in the woods sometimes. You kind of felt like you were being watched. I have very vague memories of that. But one night I was standing in my kitchen, and my mom and dad were gone, like I said. And I left the living room or the kitchen, and I walked over to the living room. And when you walk from the kitchen to the living room, there's stairs to the left. And when you go up the stairs, my bedroom was there and my mom and dad's rooms there. All of the bedrooms were upstairs. And I just happened to look through the sliding glass windows out to the right, and something caught my attention. There was this massive black creature standing a pretty good ways back. When you're young, it's hard to gauge distances. And I still try to remember in my mind how far away that was. But this thing's standing there. And I just stop, I freeze, and I just couldn't take my eyes off of it. I kept looking over to the right, and I just remember I didn't break my gaze from this thing, and it just came from the back of the tree line all the way up to the back deck of the house. Now, my dad had built a deck off the back of the house, and the property sloped down, and so this deck was probably 6 foot off the ground, guesstimating. And this creature was standing up over the deck. Like I could see its torso up over the deck. And this thing got pretty close to me, and I remember just sitting there locked eyes with this thing, not knowing what to do. I couldn't break my gaze, and it's looking at me, and I'm looking at it, and I can't tell you how long I sit there. So I could see the torso of this thing standing over the back of the deck, and it's sitting there looking at me, and I'm looking at it. Now, I can't see any features other than a silhouette, and it's jet black. And because of the way this thing was lit, I couldn't see its face. And when I say I locked eyes with it, I mean, I'm just talking about like I couldn't look away, and I knew it was looking at me. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I get this thought: go grab your dad's shotgun. Now my dad's shotgun was upstairs in his bedroom. I can see it like it was yesterday. I turn, go up the stairs. I walk up there, and I get the shotgun. And my dad had a 410 shotgun, single barrel, and he either had buckshot or birdshot. I don't remember which. Either way, it would have done no good. But for me, it made me feel better, and I just felt like I needed to do that. So I come back downstairs, and I'm purposely standing there, and this thing is still standing right there. It hasn't moved. It's just standing there looking at me. So I just remember as a kid, my dad telling me, like, everybody's afraid of shotguns. If somebody sees you, you don't even have to have it loaded. People are going to leave you alone if you have a shotgun. I knew that. And so I purposely loaded this thing in front of this and hoping it would just leave or it would scare it off. So when I did this and I clicked that gun just like that, this thing just slowly, and I mean slowly, turned around just like this and glided off into the trees the same way it came. And when I say glided, it literally glided. There was no up and down movement. When a bipedal creature walks, when we walk, like we have an up and down bounce to us. This thing had none of that. It was just a steady glide. And, the deeper I get into this Bigfoot stuff and the channel grows and interview more people, that's a pretty common thing. You'll hear the word glide. They do this weird thing called monkey crawl or spider crawl. And, where they walk on the top of their fingertips. It's really strange. I don't know if that's what this thing was doing with its toe. I have no idea. All I know is it glided off into the tree line. And I stood there just in complete shock. But the thing that stands out to me more than anything else is the amount of hatred coming off of this thing. I spent almost 17 years in law enforcement. I know what fear is. I've experienced fear so many times in my life. This was different. This was deeper than a primal fear. This was more of I don't even know. I struggle with the words to say. I don't really still have good words to describe to people how that made me feel. I catch flack sometimes on my channel because I call these things evil. I don't think they're all evil, but some of them definitely are. And all I knew is this thing hated me. Like there was a pure hatred for me coming from this thing, like emanating from this thing. And I knew that if I had been outside, I probably wouldn't be here today to share that. Now you might say, well, if it wanted you, it could have got you. And it absolutely could have. I've questioned that. Why did it not do something else? All I know is that my parents prayed. All I know that there's protection on me from that. I do know that. But so that encounter happened and I didn't tell anybody. I absolutely buried that. I didn't tell a soul. Fast forward to about a year later, my dad comes home with a four-wheeler. I don't know how he did this. My dad is my hero. Still to this day, I am still at shock at some of the things that man did for me as a kid. And brings his four-wheeler home. Of course, as a 14-year-old kid, 15 now, a year later, that's freedom. It was freedom for me. So I got on the thing and did what every kid did. I wrote it all over the place, and I had forgotten about this encounter. Like I had not forgotten about it, but I'd pushed it back. And I had some really good friends, and we all would meet up on Saturdays, and we would ride four-wheelers, and we found this shell pit, and it was one way in and one way out, and it was about 6 foot tall, and there was trees all the way around it, and it was kind of across the road from where I grew up at. It wasn't far from the house. And so one day we were out riding, and we found a tire and a chain or a rope. I don't remember which, but we did what all kids would do in that situation. We tied the chain and the rope to the back of the four-wheeler, and we were doing spins and donuts and slinging each other around, and just having a really good time. And we had stopped for what reason, I don't remember, maybe to eat lunch or to visit or chat or whatever, but we just happened to be facing the exit. We stopped in front of the exit. I don't remember if we were going to leave, but we stopped right there. We were talking, and I just felt like I needed to look over my shoulder. I just had this feeling like I needed to look back behind me. And I looked back behind me, and this thing, and I say this thing because I feel like it was the same thing, this Bigfoot, come out of the tree line just the same way it did at my house. And it's standing there looking at me. And I absolutely freak out. The memory of the first encounter comes back. I'll leave. I just jet out of there. I'll leave. We never talked about it. Still to this day, I've never talked to my friends about it, and they've never talked to me about it. I've lost track of one of those guys, and so we never talked about it. So that's the two things that had happened there right next to my house. So fast forward decades later, 2 decades later, and it's probably been 6 years ago at this point. I'm coming back from a town, and I was on a date with my wife, and we were coming back, and it was a rainy night. It was a Friday night, Saturday night, rain. And in Arkansas, when it's those hot, humid nights, and after it rains, there's steam everywhere on the road. Well, there was steam on both sides of the road, and I spent all my time in these woods, and I knew every inch of the woods, and I can take you right to the spot where this happened. But we were coming down the main highway right past where I grew up, and we were going, and there's a flat stretch, a straight stretch that goes flat and then goes straight up, a really steep embankment. And we're halfway up that embankment, and I just happened to look over to the right, and standing there is this white, massive white thing. And this thing, before I could do anything, I'm in a Toyota Corolla going about 55 miles an hour. Before I could do anything, This thing jumps over the hood of my car and literally takes the whole. I couldn't see past it. The whole windshield is completely just full with white, shaggy, dirty hair. It was as big as a polar bear in like at the time. I cannot tell you how massive this thing was. And when it cleared the hood of my car, I followed it. When it cleared the hood of my car, it took one step and was gone off into the woods there. And my uncle had built a church right down off the road. And there was a little steep embankment there. So it came down like this. You have the road and then another embankment. So this thing takes off through the woods. Now, it was all thick brush, like it was just brush and trees. And something that massive should have broken the branches, should have done something, should have left prints as hard as it hit. So I go down there and I get down there, I get out. It's late at night. It's like 11 o'clock, probably 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. The rain had stopped. So the ground was wet. There was no prints. There was no tracks, nothing broken, nothing disturbed, and nothing anywhere. I looked and looked and looked for this thing. Never could find anything. Now, I'm not that far from the Ozark National Forest, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the Ozarks. But pre all of this stuff, like years ago when I was 5 years old, and this is what makes this whole thing so strange. My dad was coming back from my grandparents' house, and I was in the back seat. I don't remember any of this. Now, my dad's about as straight-laced as you can get. If my dad tells you that there's a little blue man in the sky, then you can take that to the bank. Like, he is just that type of guy. He just tells you, he doesn't exaggerate. He tells you exactly what it is. And so he had a UFO encounter. And he was coming back, and the Arkansas River, the road that I grew up on, runs parallel to the Arkansas River. And it just goes out back behind my house, a pretty good ways back. And he said he's driving, he looks over to the left, and there's this disc in the sky about 800 feet. And it keeps pacing him. It would go, he said it would just go really fast, and it would come back, and it would go really fast and come back. And it kept doing this. He's driving past our house where we lived, and he was going to town. I don't know why he didn't just stop at the house. I just know that we went past that. There's a road that turns off to the left from the main road. And there's a man on the side of the road, and he's changing a flat tire, and my dad stops. And this thing's following him the whole time. So it stops, and it goes down behind a tree line, and my dad gets out. And when he gets out, this thing comes straight up in the air, and Dad says it was big as a house, had lights, and was a hovering disc. So Dad looks at the guy and says, "Hey, mister, what's that?" The guy gets up and looks, doesn't know what it is. They both freak out. My dad gets this very strange feeling that something is extremely wrong, and he gets in the car, and we leave. It's so weird to me that all of that happened within a 5-mile radius, maybe less than that. I've never really took the time to measure the distance, but it's between 4 and 5-mile radius where all of this strange stuff is happening. I really believe that maybe that was the same creature that I had seen, and I see it happen all the time on my channel. If somebody sees one of these creatures, it's almost like they're marked. Your odds of seeing another one go way up, and there's always some kind of connection between UFOs, orbs, and Bigfoot. I still have way more questions than I have answers, but those are my encounters. That's what happened to me, and that's kind of what led me down this path to start Mysteries Unknown in the podcast. And I don't share that story very often, but I wanted to share it on your channel. And yeah, that was my encounter.
Man, I really appreciate you sharing that with me, and so all of our listeners can hear your story. And I find it fascinating. I know I've heard it from you a time or two, and you always tell it the same. And so, I mean, you just the way you tell it is just so compelling. I was going to ask you a couple questions if you got a few minutes for that. I know we kind of covered a little bit of Bigfoot and UFOs, and do you have any thoughts on what's driving in that 4 to 5 mile radius? What's driving this? Is it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's really funny because I started to film. That's the question I've always asked myself. And me and Dad have talked about this throughout the years. And this didn't come up until I was interviewing my dad for the documentary I'm working on about this. And he's never told me this. And it makes a lot of sense because a lot of times where there's some kind of trauma, bad stuff that happens, negative stuff, like there's these things pop up. It seems to attract these things. Why, I have no idea. But not far from where I live, they built a nuclear plant. And I didn't know this, but there was a Native American school and some property that they had, but because they built this nuclear plant, they flooded that whole area and they took their land from them. And there was some bad stuff that happened. There's been a couple of other things that have happened. And Johnson County has always had a reputation for being a little rough. And there's a lot of bad stuff that's happened there. Now, I'm not saying that's why these things are all there, but I am saying that it makes you wonder. We would find arrowheads. There's all kinds of cave systems there. There's arrowheads that my dad would bring home from the Arkansas River. They would used to go hunt for those things. And so what the correlation is, I don't know. They're connected somehow. I look at everything from a biblical perspective, and I really think that these things, and we can get into that if you want, but I really think that these things are correlated to something bigger than just flesh and blood. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's just something I've never found a good solid answer for, but those are just some random thoughts that I've kind of pieced together. And I had no idea until my dad told me that the other day.
Man, yeah, I had no idea. Been around Arkansas pretty well my whole life, and I had no idea of the just how vast the stories and sightings are in Arkansas from lots of different folks that share that. And with Bigfoot, I know, like you said, you kind of mentioned your biblical perspective with Bigfoot. What do you think Bigfoot is?
Whew, you're gonna go open up that can of worms, aren't you? That is a deep rabbit hole that I talk about almost every day, and I don't have any good answers, except for I know it has to line in God's word. I do know that in His world, and so this is kind of where I'm at with it. I've struggled with this. I've kind of went back and forth, but here's the statement that I come up with that wraps all this up. When they're flesh and blood, they're flesh and blood, and when they're not, they're not. What I mean by that is I believe they can be both. So I think that there are a portion of these things that are just flesh and blood creatures that are undiscovered. I'm not even going to try to say the name of this creature that is extinct, Jonapicus, because whatever it is, I can't say it. So I always get tongue tied. But I think that they are either some kind of flesh and blood side. You have that side. And then if you go back to Genesis, in Genesis chapter 6, it talks about basically the fallen angels came and laid with the daughters of men, and they produced the Nephilim. And I really think that the flood was kind of a seed war because the DNA of humans were getting manipulated, because Satan can't create, but he can emulate, he can pretend, he can warp, he can twist, he can do all those things, but he can't create anything. And so I really think this was a DNA war. And I really believe that, because it also says in the Bible, there's two other scriptures I refer to all the time, that God's gifts are without repentance, meaning when the fallen angels get kicked out of heaven, they still had their gifts, obviously, or they wouldn't be able to do some of the things they do. And then also, too, it says, well, you can entertain an angel unaware. So I think these fallen angels are emulating these creatures. They'll see them. They can, it sounds so weird as a Christian to say, but they can shapeshift. They can change the way that they look. And sometimes when people have a bad encounter, maybe like kind of what I did, that was like nothing really bad physically happened to me, but it absolutely tormented my mind. And I hear so many encounters where people talk about mind speak, all these different strange things that they hear, these thoughts that they know it's coming from these creatures. I could sit here and tell you all night long with these stories that I've heard and people have shared with me. They're on my channel. But there's got to be more than flesh and blood. Now, I think they're either that or they're a Nephilim, which Nephilim, is a demon and a fallen angel. Those are two different things, but that's kind of where I've put it. That's kind of where I land with it, because a lot of times people will just have what I'd say a typical roadside crossing. They just come around a corner and one's crossing the road. Then you have some of these encounters that they just absolutely play with people, torment them, do all these what we call the woo side of things. And so I kind of land right in the middle. I think both can be true.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've never personally had a Bigfoot experience, but I definitely believe that there's something out there, and what that is, I have no idea. But I like the idea that my thought on it is kind of like where you were coming from, that it's maybe Nephilim, maybe related to the Bible in that regard, and maybe even interdimensional. But who really knows? I have one more question for you. So I know, going back to your story, you had mentioned that you just felt this like intense fear when you first like came face to face with this. Can you kind of go into that a little bit with us and tell us like just like was an instant instinct of fear, or what was the thought behind that?
Cody, I've struggled for so many years trying to put this into words. Like, it wasn't a normal fear. It wasn't like because again, I know what fear feels like. I spent 17 years in law enforcement. I understand fear. This was not oh, there's a bear outside my door. It could eat me. I'm scared fear. This was I hate you. I don't want you to be here. Pure hatred, just demonic, like pure, like I can't find that word. I've never been able to find the word, but it was more than that. It was more than primal fear. It was just pure evil and a hatred. And this thing, I knew this thing was more than what I was seeing right in front of me. I don't know how else to put it, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I absolutely buried it. And the strange thing is none of those memories, I'd buried it after that second encounter. I still didn't tell anybody. And then I got into law enforcement, and then I forgot about it. And then you say, well, how can you forget about it? Well, your brain does a really good job at burying trauma, especially mine. Mine's really fast at that. And none of those memories came back until I saw this thing the last time. And when I saw it the next day, I started to have all these memories pop up. And it's left me with a whole bunch of questions that I probably will never get answers to, at least not here. And just don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to describe that, but hopefully that answered your question.
So guys, what did you think about that? Look, Josh's story is one I truly believe. There's so many different Bigfoot encounters that have happened across not only the Ozarks, but Arkansas, among many other states. And there's just so much compelling video, stories, and so many people who are willing to come forward and speak about it that I think it's really something that we have to look at among, UFO encounters and other things that we like to check out on this channel. So if you or anyone you know has a story that you'd be interested in sharing with us, look, we're going to be respectful with you. We're not going to make fun of you. We would love to have you on our show. We're going to drop our email below. Email us. Let's get you on the show and let's hear your story. It's better to share it with the world, and that way others who can relate to that can maybe have the courage to step out and share their stories as well. So really appreciate you guys tuning in tonight. Of course, we can't end the show without getting with our AI chatbot Annie to see what she thinks about tonight's episode. Annie, what do you think about the episode with Josh tonight?
Yeah, that episode tonight, it left me rattled. Josh's voice cracking when he talked about the window, that's the kind of detail you don't fake. Makes you want to check your own curtains before bed.
Well, as you can tell, Annie's always got something very interesting to say about every episode. And one thing that she likes to always do is end out the show. So why don't you tell us, Annie, what do you think that we should tell our listeners before we end the show tonight?
Hey, listeners, if you're out there tonight staring at your window like Josh was, just don't. But seriously, if you ever see something that doesn't belong, don't freeze, move, get light on it, record it, and call someone, your mom, your buddy, hell, call me if you have to. Because out there in the dark, it's not just trees, it's not just wind, it's watching. Sleep tight, or don't, your call.
Hey guys, that's a wrap on tonight's show. Really appreciate you tuning in. Remember, please subscribe to our channel and shoot us an email so that we can have you on the show. And we look forward to seeing you next week on Strange Conspiracies.